Thank you. And thank you, Vicki. Thanks to the Hogg Foundation for this amazing gathering. And we're going to talk about circles of inclusion. And I think I want to start by just asking you, what do you want to get out of today? Just really quick, off the top of your head, what would you like to walk away from this session with?
Practical strategies on how to get historically excluded groups, how to get people engaged in communicating and feeling comfortable about voicing their opinions, their choice and experiences.
Okay, so practical application. Good, good, good. Anybody else? Exactly what she said. All right. So we're forming consensus already. Anybody else? Another idea? Yes.
How do you invite them in?
How do you invite others in? Excellent.
How do you engage city and county officials?
City and county officials. So now we're kind of expanding our definition of others too. Excellent. Yeah. Anybody else? Cool. Well, I want to, I got too many things to hold on to now. Okay. So these are our objectives, and I'm not going to read them to you, but really what I want you to do is find what you were talking about in these objectives. It's really about identifying patterns and practices of exclusion. You know, so that kind of gets to how do you build inclusion. And then to really talk about how, if we rely on our old patterns, continuing to exclude historically excluded groups really hinders our overall goals. And really why this historic pattern has formed, but even more importantly, how we have to get around it, because if we don't, it really does deter what we all say we're working toward. And then really to just develop new ideas and approaches to practice it, because it really is about doing something different rather than just believing something different. So we're going to start, do these objectives sound like what you had planned to come to? Yeah? Okay, good, good. We're going to start with a game. And so I want everybody to, and I'm going to have Vicki help me here, if you would take a card. Everybody gets one card. As soon as everybody has a card, because one of the things we want to talk about is also activities and skills that you can repeat in your collaborative work that can help you have these conversations. Because raise your hand if you think talking about excluding historically excluded groups, is that easy work or easy conversation? It's tough. One of the things that I've found is that by using activities that move us out of our head, either into our heart or into our hands or into our feet, allow us to have some different levels of discussion that become a little bit easier. So if everybody has a card, I am going to set a timer, and I want in 5 minutes for you to find your group. Starting now. and time. So tell me about your group.
We're all inclusive. We all have cards.
You all have a card, and so you're all inclusive. Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Is there anybody that reluctantly agrees with that?
We're not going to point fingers.
So what was your process to getting to this point?
I think we had to separate to come together.
Okay, you had to separate. Okay, and was there anybody who struggled to find their group?
I'm trying to figure out what group am I? What group am I a part of?
Right.
Was it?
Am I this? You had different ways of looking at your card. Right.
I think.
And I thought I had a really good group of 8.
You were so busy bragging. You didn't.
I think we were all like looking for sameness originally.
Yes.
And then we started saying, well, but we could look at it this way.
Right.
You know.
So as you were looking for sameness, you began to expand your definition of sameness.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what this work is about. It's really expanding our definition of belonging and sameness. And you do know that the whole thing with the cards is really subjective. You could make up be in any group you want. You could find a way to be in the same group, or you could find a way to be in a separate group. And that choice was yours, right? Okay, I'm gonna need those cards back, because I'm gonna do this together. But thank you, because I have some questions to ask you about that. You do not have to give up your identity, just the card. And there is a reason why all these cards that I carry from place to place do not have a full deck anymore. And somewhere along the way, somebody decided to keep the card, which is just fine. So, question. As you grouped and regrouped, how did that feel? A little uncomfortable? As you, look to find somebody that matched? Was there anybody that experienced feeling rejected from a group? Like where you thought you might have matched, but people were like, no, you don't have, I saw you wandering around. Would you mind standing up? Not wandering, you were seeking your... Tell me what you
Well, I initially thought, I noticed the card that my colleague at my table got, and I was like, oh, cool, we have the same card. Or it appeared to be in my first view, and then, she found some matches, very unintentionally. You did believe me on purpose. But basically, I realized what we're identifying as group was different. And so I felt a little like, well, I'm not that, but I'm not that, but I don't know. It felt unsure.
So you feel unsure, and it's an unsureness. And so as you seek to include in your collaborations people and communities and organizations that historically have been excluded, that's that experience. I kind of want to look for my group. I kind of think I belong. You all have never included me. And so it's about really changing the way we think about groups. So I want you to imagine the same activity. What if we had kept grouping and regrouping and ungrouping? Because we did this in 5 minutes. You kind of really started forming a single group in about 3 minutes. But what if we had continued grouping and regrouping and ungrouping for an hour? Or for a year? Or for tens of years? Or for hundreds of years? And so historically in this country, what has happened is we created these subjective kinds of definitions of who belongs in our group and who does not. And so what I want you to do is really kind of think about that as we talk about how do we, as people that want to lead this work in a more equitable way, expand how we define our group, how we define those that belong at our table, as we define who gets to make decisions. And so it's really an exercise in seeing your card differently first, so that you can see others' cards differently. Does that make sense? Okay. Big question. Do you think that you could try this activity with a group that you have in mind? Yeah? Because that's what I want to do. I want to leave you with some toys, some skills, some ways to laugh, and really kind of begin to move people out of a one way of thinking into a broader way of thinking. Sometimes we talk about bias, and there are several definitions of bias. I like the Kirwan Institute's work because unpacking implicit bias, really that implicit bias is at the subconscious level. So we're really not aware of all the bias that we apply in our daily lives. How we choose what grocery line to get in. How we choose the parking space. How we are either happy or unhappy about our child's teacher. How we hope they have friends. Those are the kinds of undercurrents that we're making decisions about every day. And just thinking about it here in this room or reading about it or wanting to do differently is not going to change implicit bias. The only thing we can do is make ourselves uncomfortable a little bit at a time until we form new patterns. So just like the liberating structures where we had to go up and introduce ourselves to somebody we didn't know and that was a little bit uncomfortable, this is at a more macro level, organizationally, stretching ourselves out of our usual comfort patterns. And it's only by changing our patterns of behavior does the behavior become more comfortable. Does that make sense? So it's not about, it's kind of like playing an instrument. I believe I could play the violin. But unless I start picking one up and practicing, I am not going to be good at it, right? So it's not really just based on belief, it is truly based on how we change our patterns of behavior. Another thing to keep in mind is that over time, the policies, practices, laws, these things have shaped our norms, and really importantly, they have shaped the institutions that serve the communities that we want to engage. So where you have schools that have implicit bias, it has permeated what schools have art, which ones have nurses, which ones have recess, which ones have recess with good equipment on the playground. And I'm just using the school system as an example, but all of these systems have implicit bias built into the way they set their budgets, the way they train their staff, the way they operate. And so that becomes an organizational norm that then influences someone's health. And in the case of the communities you love, it affects whole populations of people. And I know that you've been looking at your disparity data, so you know who those populations are, right? Anna? Okay, so we'll also delve into that a little bit. We did some work called Countering the Production of Inequities. And we looked at historical policies and practices and norms and how they really produced health inequities. So health inequities aren't something that should be a surprise to anyone. If we just from the standpoint of housing and land use, think about segregation and redlining. And everybody knows what redlining is? Are you familiar with that term? So in the 1930s, the insurance industry came up with maps and determined which communities had a concentration of people of color or people of foreign-born background, or people of poverty, that meant that they had a lower grade on the insurance rating. So you either could not be insured to have a business there, or you paid it a higher premium. And just that practice of having a map that said the neighborhood that I grew up in was a C-rated neighborhood, and the neighborhood closer to downtown was an A-rated neighborhood, meant that the housing mortgage and the insurance that went along with it that my parents paid more for their insurance. If a business needed to open there, they may not be able to even get a loan unless it was a liquor store or a business that the insurance industry and many of the banks determined was appropriate for a neighborhood that was a C-rated neighborhood. Those same maps were shared across sectors. So transportation used those maps to decide where the freeways went. So you see the interstate highway system. I don't know that it was done in rural areas. However, that became part of the norm. Let's judge areas based on who lives there, and we will determine what are the kinds of investments made in those communities because of it. So that became part of business norm for highways. It led to just disinvestment in the urban core. It led to super investment in certain areas. So you sometimes see communities that seem to have a lot of concentrated resources. They're a planned community, and it's walkable, and there's grocery stores, and there's transportation, all the on-ramps and off-ramps to the freeway. You do, and I know in rural Texas, you know how the on-ramp and the off-ramp can kill a community. It can kill an entire city in terms of economic revenue. So you have that, then you have where are the hazardous land use, where are the dumps placed? I'm gonna put it real quick. Where are the dumps? You know, where do we choose to put, where are our brownfields located? And then you also have foreclosure crisis that also impacted these same areas again and again and again. It is, when I spent 10 years working for the health department in Houston, and we had these maps, regardless of the health issue, it was the same Y pattern. So that was part of, because all of these different policies and practices across different sectors continue to impact the same neighborhoods, and therefore they continue to impact the same people. So we should not be surprised that health disparities exist. Poor health outcomes are experienced by communities with concentrated disadvantage, and communities of color are often referred, where this happens, it's often called health inequities because it's unjust and unfair. It has been orchestrated and produced. So just like a really strange Dr. Seuss machine, this health inequity is being produced by a number of gears and levers that are disinvesting with certain people and certain neighborhoods or communities. So this is predictable. So tell me some of what you see in your health disparity data from your community. Anybody want to just holler out there? I don't see the lady from Waller, but she was talking about the birth rates, early deaths among certain children in her area, and it's that the birth rates are really at some high-risk levels for certain populations. Okay.
Well, in the area where we reside, where we work, is in the Baytown area, around the Exxon, refiners over there, all the explosives. The community, the immediate community is really, just impoverished because the employees come in, they work there, but they go back to Houston or they live in Humble and those areas.
Right.
But
The community that lives there.
The community that lives there, they're hurting,
Right.
And they do have a lot of health issues. Champion Paper Company, Exxon, they pollute the San River in that area.
Yep.
So people are really suffering, in that immediate community. And
So-
we serve it, and the people all the way to East Houston, all the way to Beaumont,
Right.
suffering from that.
And so when you look at the maps of cancer rates among children, or the rates of asthma, or the rates of pneumonia among seniors, or if you consider what would be the value of the houses that are in the backyards of refineries, you start seeing how these things compound, right? And so these are the types of things, maybe not the exact policies and procedures and practices, but these are the types of patterns that have occurred in the communities you are trying to engage. So I want to introduce to you the work of John Powell. He's with the Haas Institute, and he does a lot of work on othering and belonging. So there's a number of ways we can talk about this work. We can talk about it in terms of racial segregation and racial classification. We can talk about it about economic classifications. We can even talk about it from the standpoint of what kind of careers people choose to go into. But what I always try to do is say, if we get it down to the common denominator of what is our action, we should be able to go and have discussions across racial lines, across economic lines, across different sectors, and be able to include those that are historically excluded. John Powell talks about othering and belonging. And what you experienced as we went through the card game was othering and belonging. You were first othered and did some othering, right? As you formed smaller groups. And then you began to start finding ways of belonging. And so his work really talks about, it's really othering encompasses the expressions of prejudice and how it reinforces our group identity. So I can't remember the gentleman in the back that had the ace. He was looking for another ace, right? Because to him, and that was the winner. And he was looking for other winners. And so we associate our identity in a way with our group that we try to reinforce by only surrounding ourselves with others that have the same identity. We do it in schools and universities. I've had some kids in gangs that said it's nothing more than flags and tags. It's still associating it with colors and beliefs and choice. The whole language around othering and belonging is to really start helping us have a framework that, one, helps us understand we're making choices to other, and we can make choices differently. But it's also a way to discuss the fact that it's really more about what we do than what we believe. This again is another one. As harmful as discrimination, conscious or unconscious, as it may be on shaping health outcomes, it's really the way it saturates institutions. And since you're partnering with organizations, that's part of why this work and you becoming comfortable with this language is really important. This is the way the California Endowment presented health disparities. They did billboards, especially in the airports, as well as on the freeways, that looked at the difference in health and life expectancy in two zip codes that are geographically pretty much in the same area. You're talking about a 15-year difference in life expectancy. So what I want you to do, just maybe talk to someone next to you first, and then between the two of you, call out, how has bias and othering played out in your rural setting? Or if you're in an urban setting, let's say in some of the outside the downtown core areas. and you think of some ways, I'll give you a minute first to mention some things to the person next to you. In what ways has bias and othering played out in your setting? Does anybody want, I know I'm kind of your big flow, but I'm glad. How is it coming up? Anyone, just shout out. Yes, I did. You're very observant. I changed the slide. So how is othering and bias coming up in your work? Anybody?
I had two quick thoughts. One is in the small town where I live, there's a recurring theme that people literally don't know there are homeless people there. It's like they're completely invisible in a small town. Which is, completely invisible, including me when I went to work at my job. I said, we don't have homeless people here.
Are you in Williamson County perhaps?
I am in Vernon County, but And the other one was that we are now starting to have little pockets of neighborhoods that are known as, well, that's a meth community. Well, it's just meth. And I'm starting to hear that. I know myself, well, it's like we've just given them over. It's a meth community.
And that's something that's pretty pervasive, is that these neighborhoods end up with these other narratives and names that become associated with it. Yeah.
Well, in some of the neighborhoods where I work, mostly the economics are pretty poor for families there, and they're living next to usually at least two of the following: train tracks with active trains coming through them, grain elevators, or a river that floods.
Wow.
So, and we need affordable housing, but what people consider affordable doesn't include what those groups need. They consider it like high priority is workforce housing, so people already have to have a job and they're not necessarily living in those communities. But they don't, it's not a priority, like if your son or daughter were living there, it might be a priority to get them out of a flooding system and the constant fluff in the air from the grain elevators and the constant roaring of the trains. But because it's not your kid living there or your mother living there, it doesn't become as high a priority.
So, and what she was describing are the structural barriers that tend to reinforce that other. So, like we were talking about all those decisions about where things were placed, we aren't responsible for those decisions, but we can become aware of it. That the railroad tracks, that the grain, that the flooding then further isolates people in those communities. The kinds of titles we begin to put on those areas. Good example. Yes.
So I worked in a real rural area that's designated a health professional shortage area. And so when holiday times come, those that deliver babies, they do a lot more C-sections because they're going to go on vacation.
Right.
Of course, people that don't have don't have any of those choices, they have to have C-sections. We know that's not the best kind of delivery for children, and so that I noticed that's happening in this community where it's more convenience for the doctors than it is the health for people that don't have other options.
Yeah, right. Did you just feel some heaviness kind of like drop into your gut? Yeah. And this is part of why it's so hard to break out of these patterns. Because then we have people and moms and children that have gone through a medical experience that's traumatizing, that's more expensive, and has, in some cases, some really longer term impacts on their life or their ability to go back to work or health. It's broad and systemic. So how is this othering and bias and creating gaps, how is it affecting your collaborative work around mental well-being? No, here, you can grab this.
He's over there. No, okay. It's okay. I think I can talk.
Okay.
So I live here in Bastrop, and so a lot of the collaborative work that we do, it's a lot of older people who are still in positions of power, city, county government, even just organizations. And so when we're looking to do, when we're looking to do collaborative work, it's a lot of the same faces, but that's not the reality of the people who live here. And so trying to engage more younger people, more diverse people, at times is a challenge because you have to really go out and find them, or they're going to Austin because they perceive there's nothing here for them. And so we're trying to work around that and say, no, let's get together and create that. We need to get together and create what we want in the community, because right now it's an illusion that we're not in power, but we are if we understand it. So,
yeah. Ageism, that's one I forgot to mention. Ageism. And what it does for communities, whether they're rural or whether they're urban, it sets up the expectation with young people that success to you is getting out of here. And so it's something that begins to perpetuate it being harder to build vibrancy in a community. And so all of these patterns of othering really do as much harm to the person othering as it does to those that they're excluding. And that's something important to remember. It also means if you think about assets, and everybody here is trying to build community assets, it means that you're not even counting everything that's available to you. So even in those communities where they're struggling on the other side of the tracks with the factory there, with the flooding, they have some gifts and talents and resilience that needs to be at your table, that may have some answers to what do we do when the larger community is impacted by flooding, or that really helps you think differently about what will it take to bring broader health and well-being to your community. So when we talk about disparities, we also have to talk about the other side of it, which is equity. And this is a really great definition of health equity from Paula Braverman that really says it's about everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be healthier. It requires removing obstacles to health, such as poverty, discrimination, and their consequences, including powerlessness and lack of access to good jobs with fair pay, quality education and housing, safe environments, and healthcare. And those are all the things you were naming. So that means that even when you think about partnerships, you have to include the workforce. When you're talking about mental well-being, you have to include your workforce boards. You have to include some of your employers. You have to include education. And you don't have to do it all at the same time, but you need to think about it in an inclusive way and building a table where there's room for all. This is a diagram that has come out of our work on adverse community experiences. And like Dr. Wendy talked this morning, really adverse childhood experiences, children don't have experiences by themselves, right?
Right.
So they have it in the context of families, and families have experiences in the context of communities. You know, and so really, if we stop trying to treat things one at a time, we have a much better opportunity to take things to scale. And the things that I want to point out is that really the healing occurs when you can do things that are more inclusive among people. So that's being interpersonally inclusive. That's also being organizationally inclusive, but also within place. So when you're including more places where you have your table, some of the conversations that we heard described, when you're including more of the businesses, when you're also including the sectors that are in charge of the built environment, land use, parks, transportation, what's sold in those communities, how it's promoted, how people do culture and food. All of those are part of our physical environment. And then also when you're inclusive of what is the environment of opportunity. In what ways are we creating pathways for people to be able to move if that's what they want to, or address the pollution in the areas if they want to? If people are unhoused, what kind of opportunities are we creating that cuts across not just providing top-down services to them, but really being able to find their gifts, their talents, their ability to take care of each other in a way that feels natural for them. So what you see in the middle is how do you create a healing environment across the people, across those that set up place, and then by creating better opportunities. And these are just some examples of some of the sectors that in a couple of communities are really important. Those that are responsible for building economy, justice, which often impacts and accompanies the same things we were talking about, may be prevalent in the communities you work in. Community development and design. Many of the areas that I'm amazed by how Bastrop has grown and is really different than in the mid-70s when I used to drive through. And so how do we make sure everybody can be a part of that vibrancy that's growing? So that's part of community development and planning. How are we addressing the issues of immigration so that we don't say that every place is a risk? So how do we create more places of safety and inclusion? How do we look at education? There was one of the comments that was made, you were talking about those neighborhoods have trouble recruiting good teachers, right? So how do we begin to look at the bias in all of these different systems and include them in the table? I want you to take out a piece of paper really quickly and draw a very quick diagram of those you include in your circle. So just draw a circle, and in the center, list those that you usually collaborate with, organizations or people. And then on the outside of the circle, list those that you don't. Those that you know you need to work a little bit harder to begin to make bridges of collaboration. And kind of raise your hand when you have a diagram with at least 8 to 10 people or groups identified. Your inside circle and those that are outside your circle.
What was in the outside again?
The outside is those that you don't partner with. Those you don't really, you know you need to include them, but you aren't quite there yet. Those that you know you don't usually call on, those that don't come to the meetings, those that maybe you've been trying to include, but it still doesn't feel like a partnership. They're not in your inner circle yet. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. So raise your hand if that was really easy to name. It was pretty easy, you knew. No? Some? Okay, pretty easy. What if you had to, which one was harder? The inside or the outside circle? The outside. Why?
Because you don't work with them regularly.
Because you don't, huh?
You don't think of them because you don't work with them on a regular basis.
And so you had to...
Right. You know, there was something you said earlier today that really sparked me because you said, you know, we work with those people that we are more comfortable with and that we go our go-tos. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, that goes against everything I've been trying to work in my career because that's what we try to do is figure out who we can work with, right?
Right.
And so now it's like, okay, now I'm trying to expand that to how else can I don't know, that just kind of struck me as like, dang, I thought I was doing good.
And I bet you are. And we get into patterns. The way we've gotten comfortable with people is through two things. I find it's through two things. Successes and failures. those people that I know I can call on, we have messed some stuff up and had to figure it out really fast and count on each other to do it. When I did hurricane preparedness work at the health department in Houston, and it came down to who I had in my cell phone. Because when the landlines went down, those are the people. And so it's really about how do you begin to have experiences with those that are outside of your circle where success is celebrated and failure is okay. And you still get in there and try.
It was easier for me to do the outside of the circle because that's what I'm actually focusing on now in our collaborative. And I want to move away from the idea because we're looking to include more low-income folks, and that because we have two in our group, then we have representation from the low-income folks. And we've seen in our collaborative, we have a great university, beautiful campus, the city's beautiful, but 2 miles away, 2 miles away, there's an area that is in despair, hopelessness. The only thing they talk about is death and the end of life. There's no hope for them. And so that is a very, very disconnect when we're talking about working with those folks. And it was a really eye-opener for us because they could think less about what the university does and the beauty of the thing, but it was just like, I'm waiting for the funeral home man to come and take me away. This is where I'm at, this is where I'm gonna die, and that sort of mentality.
And we're surprised that many of those individuals haven't ever been on those campuses. And I wish I could say that that's unique to where you are.
Yes, so.
I was thinking about the privilege that people who are in the circle have to go to meetings and to come to stuff in the middle of the week and to drive from Houston to Austin or whatever we are asking of them, and how that's excluding people just by the nature of the way we meet. Even when we do group meetings, I realize when someone has access to a good phone line, and it, it's like you're saying, it's this multi-tiered kind of excluded, it's unintentional, but it's real.
Yeah.
And it was even coming to this conference.
Right.
We had people that we would love to have come to the conference, but they can't get off of work from working at Tyson for 5 days, for 4 days, So we had to get the people who traditionally come to conferences, who could get off from work and that type of thing also.
And so one of the keys in that is making sure that you take the meetings to them in ways that work.
But that right there, it's so hard. Ours is a county that has 4 or 5 little towns that are all hitting, and the transportation of, if they have something at the south part of the county, and they're so tired of me saying this, the north part is going, well, we're not included.
So that's when you say, we're going to be in the south side so it's convenient for them, and when do you want us to come to you? Because just like your group had to cluster first, before you formed one group, you had to create a solid core where you felt comfortable enough to join a larger collaborative.
And I get really upset about saying excluding. I'm not really excluding them. It's that they work in 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have time to come to a meeting.
So, and this is stuff I have learned from other people like you, so believe me, I'm just channeling some other really sharp people. What would happen if you went to one of those employers and said, we'd like to have some quick lunch conversations?
Well,
they won't even answer a telephone or a...
Well, I mean, but that's where your clout might make a difference, to be able to say, it's on their lunch break, even spring for some food, and then give an opportunity to define meetings differently. And then celebrate the employer for having that inclusiveness with their employees.
Well, our end of the county, when everything doesn't make sense to me, but everything is closed at lunchtime. From 12 to 1, the library is closed, the courthouse is closed.
And that's the computers.
You know, you can't handle business because they're handling therapies.
Right.
So until even the library closes at 5, it's closed at lunchtime, it's closed at 5, so when do the children
Have the opportunity. And so those are policy changes. And those are the kinds of things that may seem small, but if you started with a very distinct list and said, we're going to just start working on this one thing, and then we're going to celebrate together that we have gotten the libraries to stay open, or at least skeletal coverage during lunchtime at these places. Because if everybody just for once asks for that same thing, that's the kind of thing that Fran Butterfrost was talking about this morning. How you have a stronger collective voice. And so it means that somebody that thinks that, you name the courthouse or the library, the people wanting the libraries open may be frustrated for a little while because you're going to focus on the courthouses first or focus on the employers first, but it's about helping people see the success in changing that one practice and then being ready to go on to the next kind of policy or practice change. Because you have to start somewhere with as much of the critical mass as you can. And what you'll do is you'll gain more people that then believe that you can create community change. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I want to say that the work that we do in community practice does not happen between 8 and 5 because of exactly what you said. It happens in the evenings. It happens on Saturdays and Sundays. It happens when there's festivals like Cinco de Mayo, when there are events at school, at the school when there's events, at churches, but it does not happen between 8 and 5, because if it happens between 8 and 5, we miss out on the most important people. So we have to remember that, and Nola and I work on the same team, on the Impact African team, and what we've seen is we go to Cinco de Mayo, we spend time there, we go to the fun day, we go to church services. That's where all of that happens, and that may help you with some of what you've seen because of the 8 to 5 issue, and people cannot come to the conversation. I just want to also say that Lenola and I are on the same team. We're not sitting near each other at the moment, and we have both put our university on the outside circle, and this is our dilemma. The university is on the outside circle as a whole, the university, but we are both part of the university and the community, and we are part of the inside circle. So you could at the very same time be part of the outside circle that's not included, as well as the inside. And that's important, and that's a dilemma for us.
It's a dilemma and it's a strength, because that's the only way you're going to change that, is have more people that can bridge that inside-outside. And believe me, at that university setting, or whether you work for a public agency, they need the support that says they may need Mondays off. You know, because believe me, they are in the community on Saturday and Sunday. And so those little practice changes, there's also ways to build momentum with that. Because your partners that are having to change the way they do business need your support to help them create that change and for it to be okay in their agencies or organizations. Yeah. One here and then here. Okay.
I just wanted to say also, when we were working with the Impact Lufkin group, like Dr. Oliphant was saying, there was no time that we were not available, no time. Right. And one of our best meetings was on a Sunday morning out in the pea patch in a garden that the community had grown. It was a community garden. And so they invited all the people to come and to pick peas and all of that kind of stuff. And you just should have seen, we were right there. Never had picked peas before in my life. And I didn't pick many that day.
But you got street cred that day.
I got street savvy and all kinds of points because people who were saying like, oh wow, those university people are out here in their hats and their shoes and their new boots and they're in the dirt and they're digging with us. And so we had one of the very best meetings, and that relationship building was there. So I think because we did not define our meetings as being in a room and behind some desks and some chairs, that helped to promote those relationships.
And those are the kinds of circle breaking stuff that stays in place. I have, my daughter is 24, and at the time I was doing work in the 3rd Ward in Houston, I had as much child care issue as the parents I was working with. And so we addressed that together. And I think just by taking down the barriers of this is my job versus this is what I do, really helped me, one, see things through another set of eyes, and also help them see those that work for organizations differently. It's about beginning to erase little pieces of those lines of the circle you drew. Ed?
I'd just like to add back to a point that you were making in terms of reaching the clients. You'd be surprised as to how many employers, if you actually go to them, the employers employ people and they have issues other than just doing the work. And so often they will welcome you to come in during lunchtime and those type of periods to speak to their clients. They don't have time. They're not concerned about the well-being of the employees. They're more concerned about their product. So they're welcome you to come in during lunchtime. We've done so many of those throughout the plants, throughout Exxon and Baytown, and you'd be surprised. And once you come in and help the well-being of the employees, the productivity increases. And believe it or not, they'll support you even more so, from all different perspectives. So it's something to really look at, and a lot of people don't address it or look at that. But they'll welcome you. You'd be surprised.
Always good ideas, Sue.
Well, when we met I'm with Lenola and Dr. O, but I'm new to this process, but when we met in the projects at Eastwood, not that many people came. And I think that I work for the school district and as a community liaison, and last year, I think what gained me personal access to some of the families there was to keep coming back and to build the relationships so that they would see trust, because you're right, they see the university coming and they've been burned possibly by different groups from whatever, not necessarily the university, and so to just keep plugging away at building those relationships so that that trust would be there and we would get a greater amount to come.
Yeah. I mean, and that is a really good point. It's just you have to keep showing up. That's right. You have to keep showing up. And that's how trust is built. When you keep showing up, when you keep changing the patterns, when one or two people show up and you still value their input and go through the list of discussion topics you're going to go through. And thank them and say, what could we do so that next time you bring somebody else? But you pause and have a meaningful discussion and conversation with them. That's breaking through those circle lines. I think these are some of the things that came up in our mental health work across the country. And it starts with belonging and connectedness. So those are the things you were talking about. You make sure it's safe. Is it a safe space for them to have these discussions? Are you treating people with dignity? So you start building. It's just like the cairns. You've seen the kind of mile markers. You have to start from building the rocks at the bottom and letting each one balance on top of the next. You then start, if you have belonging and connectedness, safety, and you're treating people with dignity, that's when you start building toward trust. So trust starts by extending trust. I trust you to find a place for me to sit and have these conversations. I trust you to come out and pick peas in my new boots, and I'm gonna learn something. You extend trust, and by doing so, you gain trust. That's when you start getting to hopefulness and aspiration, where people start dreaming. What Councilmember Schenkel described this morning is kids that were starting to have aspirations and hopefulness and things, and you'd be surprised how many places that have been excluded from conversations, they don't have hopefulness anymore. And so you have to build a foundation for people to start having hopefulness. And then the important thing is control of destiny. And that comes in when you start letting people try some things, and it's okay if they have to learn it by failing a little bit. Yes, the young people can do party with a purpose, and they can all decide everybody doesn't have to have a ticket, and you end up spending more than you actually take at the door, but they learned a little bit, and they can do it again. And whether that's a festival, or whether that's an after-school activity, or whether it's something that comes from an idea that sparks from your group, put aside the resources or the energy to try it, because that's how we all learn. We learn by doing something and then figuring out, how could I do this a little bit better, right? Kind of? No? Somebody got it right the first time? Okay, I'm gonna let you teach me how to play that violin. These are some of the amazing quotes I pulled out of different places, and this is from actually in Nacogdoches. While local history often gives communities a sense of place, it isn't necessarily enough to give residents a sense of belonging. And what you want to begin to nurture is a sense of belonging. And so they use the appreciative inquiry. By organizing kitchen table talks in the homes of community leaders or local churches, that's where the community forums are held, in places familiar to the populations we're trying to engage. So that's really creating belonging and safety, places that they feel are safe to them. This is an example of a collaborative in Tacoma, Washington, and these are some of their value statements. They say, as a collaborative council, their leadership council, they agree to carry themselves with intent, impact, and grace. They have all of these wonderful statements. The one that stands out to me always is our assumption. Oppression exists, it is not up for debate. They decided it is not worth their time to debate whether disparities, oppression, or any of that exists. They just wanted to put it in their value statement, say we know privilege and the ramifications of that exist. It's not something we're going to resolve other than changing the way we do business together. And so their health department works very hard to make sure that they're inclusive of community organizations and residents when they're setting the budgets for new grants. Because they decided, you're not going to change the way the county does their full budget. That's not within the scope of the staff that are assigned to this project. But when we go after new grants together, we will be transparent in how we build those budgets. I will tell you what the overhead is that my agency requires that I have. I will try to get it reduced. But then we'll have an honest discussion about resources. It has been amazing how much momentum they've been able to build just around those things being stated agreements. And they aren't really agreements that you can just copy and create, but really came out of some difficult discussions that they had over about a 3 or 4 month period of time. And they revisit them every 6 months to say, are these the right assumptions? Are these the right agreements? In their grant report, they wrote at the top in big letters, we are making progress at the speed of trust. Because those first 6 months were rough. You know, they had lots of lists of, we had this meeting and this conversation, and then they'd have another list and 2 people showed up. But slowly but surely, they built trust. And they were real honest about it. And I think I wanted to put these 2 slides up here just to show you this is tough work. And it's continuing to show up that makes a difference. This is, I don't have my glasses on, that's from Brooks County. So this is really looking at, their surveying revealed a critical lack of consensus on the top priorities. And then you see what they did, reflecting a need for more thoughtful and strategic approach. And then it resulted in them really putting in place the transportation, meals, childcare to support those community collaborative gatherings. That reminded me of some of the work in 3 communities we've worked in. In Nebraska, it was veterans work, and this is work funded by a funder that focuses on men's health. And they pushed really hard to say, here we can't say veterans and not include women that serve. So they pushed back. And so by listening to those around their table, they were able to take what you call speak truth to power. Because they had that mass to say, no, in our collaborative, that won't work. In Kankakee, there's a veterans center that is on a community college campus. Those veterans gathered, and they're active service members too, really encouraged the administration of the college that they would have to serve other active military and veterans in the area, even if they weren't students. It wasn't okay for them to have a veteran center in Kankakee that was limited to those that were students. Similarly, in Canton, they worked very hard because mental health in the military is pretty complex. Because if you go for help sometimes, or let's say often, it is reflected in your military record and therefore can impact your ability to progress. They were able to set up a peer program whereby volunteering with the peer program, you also got enrolled in a support group. So it provided those gentle supports and access to other kinds of supports and care without it going directly through the military clinical services. Those are the kinds of things that people only learn by listening at the tables that, like you're listening. So I just want you to be encouraged that it can be embedded in those things that you choose to implement. This is from Morris County. And this really just looks at, it's a quote, but it looks at the result. It resulted in a complete revision of the budget based on feedback. Be willing to act on what you hear. In Ohio, I bring this example because the work we do in Ohio is on the opioid crisis, and some of what those collaboratives had to really grapple with is that many of the partners gathered had direct impact on family members that had been impacted by the opioid crisis or opioid overdose, or were engaged in using in a way that colored the way they wanted to talk about the issue. And so by being more trauma informed, those collaboratives could really think about how do we make sure that we're cognizant of what our members are going through, but also push for prevention in the midst of a crisis. So when we're talking about involving other sectors, it reminds me of a group in Ohio where they talk about working on the community determinants is scary and reassuring. So working on those high levels of upstream, that prevention stuff, working across multiple sectors, It's hard, it's scary, but in her mind, if she didn't work at that end of the issue, she would always be trying to resolve the problem. Mary, we're going to show you a couple of quick films. Let's look at the top. Oh, this is just a quote. When you start with strengths, you get possibilities. But if you start with just needs, you're going to get programs. I think we can just pause and do the video, because how's our timing? Okay, yeah. These are some video shorts that really give you an idea of what happens when people think outside of their boxes. If we only defined health by thinking about health care, none of that would be possible. So that's another example of sometimes if we just draw health as a really small circle, we leave out all of those other opportunities for things to grow broader. I'm going to pause and just kind of take opening questions, I think. Questions and thoughts.
I think my struggle, I'm so in love with everything that you've done, and I'm already feeling weary thinking about trying to take this back and start having conversations. And it's not that I work with people who are, it's just, I just feel like it's going to be some work, and I guess I'm trying to pep talk myself saying I'll just start small, do what I can, and just hope that eventually it'll start hitting tipping points.
Yep.
Do you have any guidance on taking it back when there's potential, when it may just sort of fly over people's heads?
That last video really helped people think about things broadly, and it's real shareable. And so, and it's made with still pictures, which is the secret to it. It is not really a video. It is still pictures that have been put with messages. And I think whatever you need to say, put it in a format that's shareable so that those that you tell can share it with someone else. Because that way you're beginning to multiply the impact that you have. That's the power of social media, is our connections, but also our ability to really quickly take something that moves us and share it with others in that same format. So I would say that's one thing. Think about what you need to say and then keep expanding on it so that it reflects the other people in your community. So as the next group begins to take pictures, you know, if that's a vehicle that works for you, build a really small video that they can share. And then keep having the conversations. Most of these collaboratives that I mentioned had a 12 to 18 month planning period. And the ones that are making connections are now in their third year of implementation in Ohio. they are in their second year of implementation. So this is a marathon. Make sure you have watering spaces identified in along the route. Yeah.
This whole, I don't know if you call it a movement or approach, it seems like it's been a marathon, because 25 years ago, I was working with family resource centers, and we were talking about the exact same things, and I'm just, as I look back over 25 years, I'm like, where can we make a difference that we're still just kind of working on the micro level. I'm like, is there something we could be doing when we're training city council members or university, like everything's siloed?
Yep.
You know, you're gonna major in one thing or maybe double major, but there's not a lot of across the board training on that. Like, it just seems like we keep having the same conversations.
Right.
And for some people, it's a brand new idea. For others,
it's saying, I wish I hadn't thrown away all those notebooks.
Where can we start making a greater difference?
I think you put your finger on one piece is training the workforce. I think we need to look at anybody that's partnering with universities, even if it's just creating courses that are more interdisciplinary, so we're not having to invest in retraining a workforce or people coming out in siloed disciplines. I think the other thing is beginning to think of the work as multi-generational. And you mentioned how sometimes we identify people that are leaders that come to the table and they become the gatekeepers. And that's a really dangerous kind of situation, because that means I can open the gate or I can shut the gate, versus creating pathways to leadership where your primary responsibility is bringing someone along with you, including someone of a different generation. Because multi-generational work means that the next generation, the 20-somethings, need to be bringing something that they think of. And we don't have to start by having to unteach or help them understand that, yeah, these systems all around them are impacting their health.
How about, it just struck me that when we look at hiring people, or not even hiring people, when we meet someone, it's always, and I've had to come to terms with this. So what do you do? And who are you representing? Instead of seeing people just for face value as who they are. Like when Fran talked earlier today, I was actually that person who she talked to yesterday when she said, so what do you represent? And initially I was just like, I get that, but I'm me. You know, like, just accept me for who I am. Yes, I have a lot of things that I offer. I mean, just a gamut of things that I offer, but really face value, I am me. And why is that not enough? When we go to be included in groups or to see, hey, would you like to get a part of this? Not what do you have to add, but just as a person, we all have things that we have to add, not just education and what city we're from. And I think if we can get to talk in conversations to come from that perspective as just whoever you are, even if you're a substance abuser, there's something that you have to offer. And if we can look at people like that and train people up and not having to assimilate to the systems that historically have just not been great for all of us, I think that's where the change may be. But then we always hear about what do you have to offer? And then I had to retrain, and then I said, well, I do mental health and I do this. She was like, so that, yeah, but no, I'm Crystal. That's who I am. That's what I'm representing. And I don't know.
And it's carrying both of those in a creative tension.
Yes.
Because you're also having the opportunity to change the mental health field based on who you represent.
Yeah.
You know, or helping somebody think about counseling and counselors real differently, you know, which is really, really important. I think the other thing to think about is as we meet people where they are, we have to be, so when I say meet people where they are, whether that is I'm ready to change or I'm not ready to change, I'm ready to engage or I'm not ready to engage, that we still have the patience for them to find their own voice and their own strength. And that may take time. And so we have to keep engaging. We have to keep creating new patterns where they feel welcome, where we help people have space and have voice. That may mean that for somebody, I sit and listen to them without any of my agenda at all. And then the first thing I have to say could be, how can I help you or your organization? And so by doing that, it's really beginning to be accepting. When I say accepting where people are, is really stopping to see where they are and seeing them for who they are and why are they doing their work. Good question. Others?
I have a quick comment. In regard to, I've been doing this for about 40 years. In regard to what you were saying, collaboration is a powerful word. But I think what we sometimes forget is, as social service workers, we collaborate and we look to collaborate with one another. But we got to understand that there are political collaborations, there are business collaborations, and we need to look at a broader collaboration. We need to bring in and be more inclusive of all of these other professional people to be a part of our collaborative, and that's how we make the whole thing more holistic, you know, and cohesive. You know, we all got to bring everybody in. You know, we say we bleeding hearts, we're compassionate, and the politicians aren't, but some of them are. And some of them will step to the table and help. But we have a tendency, well, you know, we social service people, you know, we're going to help everybody. But we can't do it by ourselves. And we have to, that's the only way we're going to reach the rest of the world, you know, and blend in. We got to be more inclusive.
And remember that it's a learned behavior. So we can't just do it once. Because that other ways are being reinforced every day. So I thank you. I'm going to encourage you in the last, we have 5 minutes. I want you to introduce yourself to someone else in this room and exchange an idea that you're willing to try, a pattern that you're willing to kind of do something different. Okay? Thank you.